BJ right in front of my little girl.
My son was killed by John Camfield, an ex-cop who chose to drink.
And I believe that he planned to kill numerous people and used my aunt as a warm-up.
In November 2021, Trevor Dooley, then 80, pleaded guilty to manslaughter with a weapon for the 2010 shooting death of David James in Valrico, Florida. The incident occurred during an argument over a skateboarder on a neighborhood basketball court, resulting in James's death in front of his daughter.
You are a bitter old man. You murdered my husband, BJ, right in front of my little girl.
Dooley, who claimed he acted in self-defense, was convicted in November. During sentencing, David James's widow, Keena, delivered an emotional statement expressing her heartbreak and anger. She accused Dooley of lacking remorse and hoped he would spend the rest of his life in prison for his actions.
You've never shown an ounce of remorse, and I hope you spend the rest of your life miserable in jail where you belong.
In court, Dooley's wife wept and apologized to James' family.
I would like the family of Mr. James and my family to know how deeply sorry I am for the grief and pain that this horrible incident has caused.
Dooley apologized to both his family and the James family, though his apology was read aloud by his attorney. The gesture failed to convince the victim's family, who criticized his demeanor throughout the trial.
I don't buy any of it. I seen him in the courtroom laughing, joking. He had so many opportunities to even mouth the words to us, "I'm sorry."
Initially, Dooley was convicted in 2012 and sentenced to 8 years in prison. However, in 2019, an appeals court overturned the conviction, citing improper jury instructions regarding his stand your ground defense. To avoid a retrial, Dooley accepted a plea deal in 2021, resulting in a sentence of 3 years probation, in addition to the 2 years he had already served in prison. This agreement was made with the approval of James's family, who sought closure after more than a decade of legal proceedings. Ang's Asian cuisine in Jackson Township, Ohio, seemed like a picture of success for its owners, Liang Xiao and Ming Chen. Their youngest daughter, Ashley, was often seen at the restaurant playing with toys and coloring. She was adored by all who knew her, embodying innocence and joy. However, what looked like a happy family life turned into a heartbreaking tragedy. One day, Liang Xiao made a frantic 911 call, reporting that Ashley was missing. He told the dispatcher he hadn't seen her for hours.
Jackson Township Police.
I can't find my daughter.
When's the last time you seen her?
This afternoon, probably.
Around what time?
3, maybe 4.
What? Okay, and you haven't seen her in 5 hours?
About, yeah. I mean, she was there sleeping. I mean, you know.
A massive search effort began, with authorities and volunteers combing the surrounding woods, snow-covered areas, and the family's apartment. Using dogs, drones, and cherry pickers, police worked tirelessly, hoping to find Ashley safe.
We worked very hard on this case, and the one thing we wanted at the end of the day was to recover that girl alive.
Tragically, Ashley's body was discovered inside the restaurant.
A 5-year-old girl was taken from us like this. It's not fair.
Police later revealed that her mother, Ming Chen, had struck Ashley in the head, causing her death. Her father, Liang Xiao, had assisted in covering up the crime. Ming was charged with murder and felonious assault, while Liang faced charges of complicity to murder and complicity to commit felonious assault. Investigators admitted that their initial search of the restaurant had focused on places where a child might hide, not where someone might conceal a body. Authorities also began investigating Ashley's past to determine whether she had suffered prior abuse.
We searched the entire restaurant for a missing child. We were thinking that she possibly had gone somewhere that the parents just didn't know where to find her at within the restaurant.
Looking for a place where a child might hide.
Correct.
Not where someone would hide a child.
Absolutely. This investigation is not over. We're going to continue to look at how this child was being raised, if there was previous to this child, and if there was previous abuse, what kind of abuse was done to this child.
Ming Chen confessed to fatally striking Ashley and was subsequently sentenced to 22 years in prison after pleading guilty to involuntary manslaughter and other charges. Ashley's father, Liang Zhao, admitted to helping conceal their daughter's body and received a 12-year prison sentence for obstruction of justice and corpse abuse. Meanwhile, Ashley's elder sister was placed in foster care. Stuart Weldon, a man responsible for the brutal murders of 3 women in Springfield, Massachusetts, pleaded guilty to all charges just days before his trial was set to begin. Weldon admitted to 39 charges, including the 2018 killings of Kayla Escalante, Ernestine Ryans, and America Layden.
How do you plead, sir? Guilty or not guilty?
Guilty, sir.
The events began on May 28, 2018, when Weldon was arrested after a routine traffic stop turned into a kidnapping investigation. A woman in his car told police that Weldon had been assaulting her and holding her against her will. A search of Weldon's home on Page Boulevard shortly after his arrest led to a horrifying discovery: the remains of 3 women. During a psychiatric evaluation, Weldon admitted to strangling the victims in the basement of his home. Investigations revealed Weldon's troubling past, including multiple arrests, with at least 2 in Westfield in 2015 and 2016, and more than a dozen in Springfield since 2002.
Defendant admitted to Fabian M. Soleil and Robert T. Kinshirf, psychiatrists, that he killed Kayla Escalante, Ernestine Ryans, and America Layden by strangling them in the basement of his 1333 Page Boulevard home.
In court, details emerged about Weldon's background. He had only completed first grade and had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, dyslexia, and ADHD. Despite these challenges, Weldon's actions led to devastating consequences. In September 2021, Weldon pleaded guilty to multiple charges, including 3 counts of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault. Consequently, he was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. In April 2017, former police officer John Camfield, aged 48, struck 5 students from Dundee Ridge Middle Academy in Poinciana, Florida, as they walked home from their bus stop. The victims included siblings Jahiem and Jasmine Robertson. Jahiem suffered severe injuries and later died at the hospital, while Jasmine sustained minor injuries. Other students injured were Jonty Robinson, Rylan Price, and Juan Mina, who suffered life-threatening injuries. Jahiem's parents spoke in court, overwhelmed with grief as they shared the pain of losing their son. They described how Camfield, who was driving under the influence, struck a group of students walking near their bus stop. Investigators revealed that Camfield's blood alcohol level was twice the legal limit, and his reckless actions caused injuries to several students and claimed Jahiem's life.
You don't know the pain that you have caused our family. My son was mowed down and killed by John Camfield, an ex-cop who chose to drink your sorrows away and then get behind the wheel.
After the incident, Camfield fled the scene but was apprehended after colliding with a parked car. An off-duty Polk County deputy, Jonathan Quintana, witnessed the aftermath and pursued Camfield, recalling his unsteady demeanor. Camfield attempted to defend himself, claiming he had experienced a medical episode due to a liver condition and denied drinking that day.
I had no way of controlling the events that occurred on April 27th. I had not been drinking at all that day.
Despite his explanation, the court found Camfield responsible for the tragedy. His driver's license was permanently revoked. In May 2018, he pleaded no contest to DUI manslaughter and vehicular homicide and was sentenced to 35 years in prison. Gregory Janowski, a dedicated husband and father, was tragically shot and killed while sitting in his car outside the Publix store in Tarpon Springs, Florida, where he worked. The accused shooter, 41-year-old Arunya Rooch, faced court proceedings after initially refusing to attend earlier hearings.
At this time, the defendant is presumed innocent.
Objection noted.
I would object to the fact that we would like to keep pre-trial publicity to a minimum.
What began as a routine pretrial hearing turned deeply emotional as Greg's widow, Elizabeth Janowski, addressed Roach directly. Elizabeth described Greg as her closest friend and spoke of the immense pain she has endured since losing him. Together for 10 years and married for only 5 months, their life was abruptly shattered by the shooting. As a young widow and single mother to their daughter, Elizabeth shared her struggles and questioned why her husband's life was taken while the accused survived.
Greg was my best friend who I was with for 10 years, and sadly only married for 5 months. Now I am a 28-year-old widow and a single mother with no way to support my broken family.
The details of Greg's death are chilling. Surveillance footage captured Rauch entering the public store shortly after allegedly shooting Greg in his car. Investigators believe she intended to harm additional employees inside. Earlier that day, Roach had been terminated from her job following threats she made against Greg, whom she reportedly blamed for her dismissal. When police arrived on the scene, Roach pointed a gun at one of the officers, prompting them to shoot her multiple times before taking her into custody.
My voice was the last one my husband heard, and I have survivor's guilt for not staying on the phone with him. We hung up at 12 p.m., and he was brutally murdered at 12:01.
Elizabeth recounted her final conversation with Greg, a phone call that ended just 1 minute before his murder. She spoke of the survivor's guilt that weighs heavily on her and the profound emotional impact on her family. In her heartfelt statement, Elizabeth expressed her disbelief in the idea that everything happens for a reason, reflecting the devastating toll of her loss.
My heart is forever broken. I used to believe everything happens for a reason, and I don't believe that anymore.
Rauch's defense argued that she was temporarily insane at the time of the incident, citing alleged workplace harassment and racial slurs directed at her. However, the prosecution maintained that Rauch acted out of anger and retaliation, and the jury ultimately rejected the insanity defense. In June 2012, a Pinellas County jury found Arunya Rauch guilty of first-degree murder for the March 2010 of her co-worker, Gregory Janowski, outside a public store in Tarpon Springs, Florida. Following the verdict, the judge sentenced Rauch to life in prison. The jury also convicted Rauch on 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder and 2 counts of aggravated assault. These charges stemmed from her actions after the initial shooting, including entering the store armed and confronting other employees. John Johnchuk was convicted of murdering his daughter, Phoebe, by throwing her off the Dick Mizner Bridge. On January 8, 2015, Johnchuk drove with Phoebe and was stopped by a police officer who noticed his car driving erratically. During the stop, Johnchuk removed Phoebe from the vehicle, walked to the bridge railing, and dropped her into the waters below. Johnchuk fled the scene but was apprehended shortly after. Phoebe's body was recovered hours later. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a unanimous guilty verdict. His defense argued that Johnchuk was suffering from a severe mental health breakdown, including psychosis, at the time of the act, which prevented him from understanding the consequences of his actions. The defense claimed this should exempt him from being held criminally responsible. However, the prosecution presented evidence showing that the act was premeditated, claiming Johnchuk's actions were motivated by a desire to hurt Phoebe's mother and his own mother, whom he felt had betrayed him. Johnchuk, who had remained silent throughout the trial, spoke briefly on the final day.
Automatic life sentence, I'm sure you know that upon your conviction, so I will adjudicate you guilty of murder in the first degree. I'll sentence you to life in prison.
Yes, Your Honor.
John Johnchuk was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole after being convicted of first-degree murder for the death of his daughter, Phoebe. This mandatory sentence followed the jury's decision, which rejected the defense's argument that Johnchuk was insane at the time of the crime. Tamara Sitch, a former WWE wrestler known as Sunny, became involved in a fatal car crash on March 25, 2022, in Volusia County, Florida. While under the influence of alcohol, Sitch rear-ended a vehicle stopped at a red light on US 1 near Granada Boulevard. The crash resulted in the death of 75-year-old Julian Lassiter. Investigations revealed that Sitch's blood alcohol level was over 3 times the legal limit. She later admitted to drinking vodka earlier in the evening, claiming she had gone out to buy iced tea. This tragic incident brought Sitch's troubling history of repeated DUI offenses to light, including 3 prior convictions in Pennsylvania. At the time of the crash, her driver's license was already suspended. Prosecutors argued that her past behavior and the severity of the crash demonstrated her as a danger to the community.
One of the things I'm looking at is whether somebody is going to abide by court conditions, and that includes following the law. In addition to that, she's got a prior driving while license suspended and apparently had no valid driver's license on the evening that this crash occurred.
In August 2023, Sitch pleaded no contest to charges, including DUI manslaughter. On November 27, 2023, a Volusia County judge sentenced her to 17 years and 4 months in prison, followed by 8 years of probation. Lee Gilley faced court on charges of capital murder after being accused of killing his wife, Krista Bauer Gilley, in their home in the Heights. Krista, a 38-year-old mother of 2, was 9 weeks pregnant at the time of her death, leaving behind a grieving family and community. Gilley called 911 late one night, claiming that Krista had attempted suicide by overdosing and that he had tried to revive her with CPR. However, when she was taken to the hospital, doctors noted injuries that did not match a suicide attempt. Police records indicate that Gilley admitted the couple had argued earlier in the evening. The couple had argued over a vehicle purchase. He claimed he found her unresponsive hours later, but acknowledged she had never been suicidal or involved with drugs. In court, a judge refused to set bond, and prosecutors requested that Gilley remain in custody without bond until a formal indictment.
Until then, he will be held without bond in the Harris County Jail.
Later, the judge set Gilley's bond at $1 million, with conditions including the surrender of his passport, no contact with his daughter and son or Krista's family, abstaining from drugs and alcohol, and GPS monitoring. Gilley posted the $1 million bond and was released from custody on October 21st, 2024. He is scheduled to return to court on November 20th, 2024. In the meantime, custody of the couple's daughter and son has been a subject of legal proceedings. A judge granted temporary joint conservatorship to the maternal grandparents and Gilley's sister-in-law, with the boy and girl remaining primarily in Texas and no contact with their father pending the outcome of his criminal case. Gavin Ramsey, a boy convicted of a brutal crime, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In April, Ramsey had broken into the home of 98-year-old Margaret Douglas, where he committed a series of disturbing acts. He reportedly recorded videos of Douglas while she slept before strangling her to death and hiding her body in a closet.
He broke into her house, watched her sleeping, and took videos of her sleeping. He then held her against her will, hit her, and strangled her. And I believe that he planned to kill numerous people and used my aunt as a warm-up, so to speak, for those other killings.
The horrifying nature of the crime left the community in shock and devastated Douglas's family. Margaret Douglas, remembered for her zest for life and excitement to celebrate her upcoming 100th birthday, had her dreams and future stolen in a senseless act of violence. During Ramsey's sentencing hearing, Douglas's grieving family confronted him, labeling him a coward for preying on such a vulnerable individual.
He could find and attack her in her most vulnerable moment, in the middle of the night when she was asleep.
In his defense, Ramsey's legal team cited his troubled upbringing and alleged that the use of Zoloft during his early years had negatively impacted his behavior. His mother expressed deep regret for allowing him to take the medication, claiming it had profoundly altered him.
You can't make me believe that my decision wasn't the ultimate cause of all of this. To simply say I'm sorry to a victim's family, that's not enough. You can't undo their heartache. You can't undo our heartache.
Despite these arguments, the judge imposed a life sentence, emphasizing the gravity of the crime and the necessity of ensuring Ramsey could never harm anyone again. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Prosecutors described the killing of former Navy sailor Victor Saucedo as an ultimate act of obsession. His ex-girlfriend, Vegas Bray, stood in court facing charges for what prosecutors and others believe was a crime fueled by jealousy and fixation. Saucedo was shot shot 9 times, even though the revolver Bray used had a 6-bullet capacity, suggesting she reloaded during the attack. The two had met during their time in the Navy, but their relationship ended the year before. However, Bray reportedly struggled to move on, displaying concerning behavior such as slashing Saucedo's tires, smearing peanut butter on his door, and damaging his property in attempts to draw his attention.
Flatten tires, put paint on his door, smear peanut butter on his door, all in an attempt to get his attention.
On the day of the murder, Bray visited Saucedo, briefly left, and then returned armed with a .38 revolver and hollow point bullets.
She was armed with a .38 revolver as well as a box of hollow point ammunition.
Saucedo had previously reported her harassment, including an incident where she struck him with a jar of jelly in front of his son. Despite these warnings, authorities seemingly failed to intervene meaningfully. Zul Limo Ray, Saucedo's ex-fiancée, voiced her frustration in court, saying the signs had been ignored, leading to this devastating outcome.
Now, we all knew what she was doing. And, I mean, he would text me pictures. He would text me when she was outside. I saw her outside of his house. But here he is showing damage to his house, physical damage at one point when she hit him with a jar of jelly, and his son was at the house. And yet, there was never enough evidence.
Bray remained emotionless as Saucedo's grieving family shared their pain in court. Saucedo's son struggled to comprehend why his father was gone.
The ex-girlfriend killed my dad.
Saucedo's loved ones viewed Bray as a dangerous presence, though her brother defended her, claiming the full truth had yet to emerge and denying allegations that she was a monster.
They're portraying her to be some kind of monster, you know? Like I said, we don't know what really happened, we don't know the full story, and she is nothing near a monster.
Despite the defense's arguments regarding Bray's mental health issues, the jury found her guilty, leading to the substantial sentence. In January 2016, a San Diego court sentenced 27-year-old Vegas Bray to 50 years to life in prison for the first-degree murder of her ex-boyfriend, Victor Saucedo. The tragic story of the Gonzalez family and the actions of Scott Farmer is a somber reminder of the devastating consequences of drunk driving. The events began on December 16, 2023, when a seemingly ordinary night turned into an unimaginable tragedy. Scott Farmer, a 48-year-old with a history of driving under the influence, was traveling the wrong way on Highway 10 in Weyauwega, Wisconsin. His blood alcohol content was measured at .346, over 4 times the legal limit. Behind the wheel of his truck, Farmer collided head-on with a vehicle carrying 4 siblings: Daniel Gonzalez, Fabian Gonzalez, Lillian Gonzalez, and Daniela Gonzalez. The siblings were returning home, filled with dreams and plans for the future. The collision ended their lives, leaving their family and community in mourning. The mother of the siblings later recounted the heartbreaking events of that night.
Recuerdo aquella noche cuando mis hijos no regresaban a la casa y ya era muy tarde.
I remember that night when my children were not returning home and it was already very late.
No era normal, presentí que algo había pasado, pero sin embargo salimos con la esperanza de encontrarlos.
It wasn't normal. I had a presentiment that something had happened. However, we went out hoping to find them.
Nunca imaginé encontrarme con esta desgarradora realidad, ver el carro de los bomberos policías y ahí ver un carro tan golpeado y un poquito de color que enseguida pensé que ahí están mis hijos.
I never imagined finding myself facing this heartbreaking reality, seeing the firefighters and police squad cars, and they're seeing a car that was so banged up and a little bit of color. Immediately I thought, there are my children.
Ese momento de desesperación apareció un policía y no nos dio ninguna información que necesitábamos.
At that moment, in that moment of desperation, a police officer appeared and didn't give us any of the information that we needed.
Después uno de los oficiales se acercó y dijo que nos vayamos a la oficina de policía en Guayaquil.
Then one of the officers approached and told us to go to the police station in Guayaquil.
Llegamos ahí y en ese momento nos dieron un informe que mis dos niñas y mi hijo han fallecido.
We got there, and in that moment, they gave us the word that my 2 daughters and my son had passed away.
Y que mi otro hijo estaba en el hospital de Nina. Esa noticia psicológicamente me dejó muerto en vida.
And that my other son was in a hospital in Nina. This news left me psychologically dead even though I was alive.
Fue desesperante ver a mi hijo Daniel conectado a unas máquinas luchando por su vida, con golpes fuertes y fracturas en su cuerpo. Al siguiente día falleció porque no pude resistir más.
It was something that caused me despair to see my son Daniel connected to some machines, fighting for his life, terribly banged up and with fractures all over his body. The next day, he passed away because he couldn't hang on any longer.
Pasaron unos días y tuve que ir a verles en la funeraria, el día más desgarrador de mi vida.
A few days went by and I had to go see them at the funeral parlor, which was the most heartbreaking day of my life.
Nadie puede imaginarse cómo me sentí al verles a todos sin vida en una camilla. Todos ellos estaban con sus cuerpos fracturados.
No one can imagine how I felt seeing all of them lifeless on a cot. They were all terribly banged up, fractures over their whole body.
Me preguntaba, ¿por qué yo? ¿Por qué tengo que estar viviendo esta horrible realidad?
I asked myself, why me? Why do I have to be living this horrible reality?
She described waiting anxiously when her sons and daughters didn't return home. Fear gripped her as the hours passed, and she set out to search for them. Her worst fears were realized when she came across the scene of the accident, where emergency responders and wreckage confirmed a devastating reality. Her daughters and son had died on the spot, and her eldest son, Daniel, was rushed to the hospital. Despite efforts to save him, Daniel succumbed to his injuries the next day.
Mis hijos vivieron cada día con estos principios y con grandes sueños, sueños que ahora solo son memorias imborrables en mi corazón.
My children lived with these principles every day and with their big dreams, dreams that are now just memories that I can't erase from my heart.
Daniel era un joven lleno de sueños y metas. Amaba la música y tocaba la guitarra con pasión.
Daniel was a young man full of dreams and goals. He loved music and he played the guitar with a passion.
Nos encantaba cocinar juntos y tener largas conversaciones sobre la vida y las dificultades que enfrentaba la juventud en nuestro país.
We loved to cook together and have long conversations about life and the difficulties that young people in our country face.
Duele mucho. Daniel llenaba nuestra casa de música y energía. Extraño mucho escuchar su voz cantando y verlo disfrutar de su guitarra.
It hurts a lot. Daniel filled our house with music and energy. I really miss hearing his voice singing and seeing him enjoy his guitar.
Junto a su hermano Fabián, Daniel soñaba con estudiar mecánica en el Fox Valley Technical College en 2024, con la esperanza de apoyar a la familia y construir un futuro mejor.
Along with his brother, Fabian, Daniel dreamed of studying mechanics at Fox Valley Technical College in 2024 with the hope of supporting the family and building a better future.
Fabián era un chico divertido, respetuoso y muy amigable.
Fabian was a very fun, respectful, and friendly child.
Le apasionaba el gimnasio y el cine. Sus fines de semana se llenaban de videojuegos y películas.
He was passionate about going to the gym and the movie theater. His weekends were full of video games and movies.
Extraño profundamente su risa y nuestras bromas. Cocinábamos juntos y compartíamos conversaciones que ahora solo existen en mi memoria.
I deeply miss his laughter and our joking. We would cook together and we would share in conversations that now only exist in my memory.
Tanto él como Daniel aspiraban a ser mecánicos y estaban emocionados por comenzar sus estudios. Ahora sus sueños y planes han sido cruelmente arrebatados.
Just like he, as well as Daniel, aspired to be mechanics, and they were excited to start their studies. Now, all of their dreams and plans have been cruelly taken away.
Lilian, mi hija risueña, soñaba con ser profesora y diseñadora de modas.
Lilian, my smiling daughter, dreamed of being a professor and a fashion designer.
Estaba emocionada por cumplir 15 años. Deseaba celebrarlos en Ecuador, soñando con bailar el vals junto a su papá.
She was excited to turn 15 and she wanted to celebrate her birthday in Ecuador. She was dreaming of being able to dance the waltz with her father.
Lilian tenía un talento especial para cuidar a los niños pequeños y una alegría que expresaba en fotos divertidas y videos que compartía con sus amigas. Su luz y alegría llenaban cada rincón de nuestro hogar.
Lilian had a special talent for looking after small children and a joy that she expressed by making fun videos and photos that she would share with her friends. Her light and joy filled every corner of our home.
Daniela, la menor de mis hijas, soñaba con ser porrista y decía que quería disfrutar su juventud junto a su prima Leslie, porque tenían la misma edad.
Daniela, my youngest daughter, dreamed of being a cheerleader, and she used to say that she wanted to enjoy her childhood with her cousin Leslie since they were the same age.
Grababa videos para documentar su día a día, hacía ejercicios, sus bailes y sus momentos especiales.
She would take videos to document her daily activities. She would exercise, her dances, and her special moments.
Su entusiasmo y amor por la vida alegraban a quienes la rodeaban y me llenaban de orgullo y felicidad.
Her enthusiasm and love of life would make everyone around her glad and filled me with pride and happiness.
Each of the siblings was remembered for their unique personality and aspirations. Daniel, the eldest, loved playing guitar and dreamed of studying mechanics alongside his brother Fabian, a lively and kind young man. Lillian dreamed of becoming a teacher and celebrating her quinceañera in Ecuador. Daniela, the youngest, brought joy to those around her with her bright spirit and dreams of becoming a cheerleader. Their mother spoke of the love and happiness they brought into their home, a light that was suddenly extinguished. Scott Farmer showed remorse and apologized.
So many lives have been torn apart by my negligence and my selfish behavior. I'm so sorry for that.
His past criminal history does not define the wonderful person he is.
Scott Farmer's history of drunk driving added to the gravity of the tragedy. With 4 prior OWI convictions, his license had been revoked, yet he continued to drive. The collision revealed his disregard for the safety of others, with authorities finding an open bottle of vodka in his truck. During the sentencing, the Gonzalez family's mother delivered a powerful testimony.
El acusado me arrebató sin piedad.
We were a happy family despite difficulties. Today, my home is empty. Every corner of the house reminds me of what the defendant took away from me without,
She shared the unbearable pain and the emptiness that now filled her home. She described sleepless nights and the emotional toll of seeing their empty chairs, their belongings, and the memories that remained.
I beg you to judge justly, to honor our children's life with a sentence that reflects the taking of 4 beautiful children who had such a great future ahead of them and had no way to avoid what they had to encounter.
The stepfather of the siblings, plead for justice, asked the court to impose the maximum sentence.
How do you plead to count 2, which alleges that on the 16th of December 2023 in the town of Waiawigga, county of Wapaka, you did cause the death of victim 1?
No contest.
I will find him guilty in counts 2, 3, 4, and 5 of the information of homicide by intoxicated use of a vehicle.
In 2024, Farmer faced legal proceedings for his actions. He pleaded no contest to 4 counts of homicide by intoxicated use of a vehicle and operating while intoxicated for the 5th time. This plea spared the Gonzalez family from the emotional toll of a trial. On November 22, 2024, Farmer was sentenced to 37.5 years in prison, followed by 21.5 years of extended supervision. The court also revoked his driving privileges indefinitely. Kayla Smith, a 32-year-old nonprofit worker, shared her heartfelt journey through 3 pregnancies, each marked by unique challenges and moments of joy, loss, and hope. She gave her testimony for an Idaho abortion trial. The Idaho abortion trial revolves around the state's strict abortion laws, which have sparked significant legal and ethical debates. Idaho implemented a near-total abortion ban in 2022, triggered by the overturning of Roe v. Wade. This law criminalizes nearly all abortions, with exceptions only in cases of rape, incest, or threats to the pregnant person's life. Even in these cases, the legal and logistical barriers to obtaining an abortion are significant, as survivors of rape or incest must provide official documentation, such as a police report, to qualify. Kayla Smith's case is one of many that highlights the real-world consequences of these restrictive laws.
Did you live in Idaho at the time you were seeking the abortion at issue in this case?
Yes.
And did you live in Idaho at the time this lawsuit was filed?
Yes.
Let's talk briefly about your first pregnancy. How many times have you been pregnant first?
3.
When did you find out you were pregnant for the first time?
I believe it was the end of December or beginning of January of 2020.
Was this first pregnancy a planned pregnancy?
Yes.
How did you feel when you learned you were pregnant for the first time?
We were elated. We were trying to get pregnant, so we were really excited.
Did you have any health issues during this first pregnancy?
I did.
Could you please describe those?
I have an autoimmune disease called ulcerative colitis, and I also developed preeclampsia with severe features.
When did you learn that you had developed preeclampsia in this first pregnancy?
I was around 19 weeks when I was started on blood pressure medication.
Did you have an understanding of what this preeclampsia diagnosis meant for your health?
To my understanding, it could result in death. months, a small baby, death to me or my child.
Were you able to control the preeclampsia diagnosis at first?
At first, the medication was working, yes.
At some point, were you unable to control the diagnosis any longer?
That's correct.
What happened?
It soon became that the blood pressure medication was not working, no matter how much I was taking. My blood pressure was not really responding. So then I was admitted to the hospital. And at that point, I also, to my understanding, had protein in my urine, which is another sign of preeclampsia advancing, to the point of I started having visual disturbances. So I was having spots in my vision. And they were, to my understanding, very concerned that I was going to have a stroke or a seizure.
What happened after you were admitted to the hospital?
My blood pressure continued to rise. The spots in my vision were there. It was not controlled, to my understanding, from IV blood pressure medication. And with the spots in my vision, it, to my understanding, was decided to move forward with an induction at around 33 weeks.
Was your baby delivered safely?
She was.
Was she able to go home with you right after birth?
She was not.
What happened?
Because she was premature, she had to stay in the NICU.
How long did she stay in the NICU?
Around 11 days.
In 2020, Kayla and her husband James were overjoyed to learn they were expecting. It was a planned pregnancy, and their excitement was palpable. However, their joy was tempered by unexpected complications. At 19 weeks, Kayla was diagnosed with a condition that caused dangerously high blood pressure. Despite early interventions, her condition worsened and she was hospitalized. At 33 weeks, doctors decided to induce labor for her safety and the unborn daughter's health. Her daughter was born prematurely and spent 11 days in the NICU before finally going home.
After this experience, did you have any concerns about becoming pregnant again?
Our only concern was getting preeclampsia again, because I was aware that I was at marginally higher risk.
Do you have a plan moving forward for any future pregnancies to address that concern?
We did. I met with my OB and maternal fetal medicine to have a plan of action moving forward, knowing my risk. So I started taking low-dose aspirin, and then we also wanted to make sure I had like baseline labs taken care of as well, so we knew where I was starting.
This experience left Kayla and James relieved but cautious about future pregnancies, prompting them to create a medical plan to reduce risks. In 2022, the Smiths were thrilled to discover they were expecting for second time with their son, Brooks.
Let's talk about your second pregnancy now, the pregnancy at issue in this case. When did you learn you were pregnant a second time?
It was Mother's Day of 2022.
Were you living in Idaho at this time?
Yes, I was.
Was your second pregnancy a planned pregnancy?
It was.
How did you feel when you found out you were pregnant again?
We were really excited. We were trying to get pregnant, and we wanted to grow our family.
Did you decide on a name for your second baby?
Take your time.
Yes, we did.
What was that name?
Brooks.
Did you go to the doctor during the beginning of your second pregnancy?
I did.
When you first started going to the doctor for the second pregnancy, was there any indication of any issues?
To my understanding, no. Everything seemed to be normal.
Did there come a point in the second pregnancy that you realized there could be some issues?
Yes.
Approximately when was that?
It was at a routine anatomy scan, which for me, it was around 18, almost 19 weeks since I had found out I was pregnant so early.
And approximately what was that date?
August 24th of 2022.
Did you attend a similar appointment to this one during your first pregnancy?
I did.
How did this appointment for the second pregnancy compare?
During my first pregnancy, it was the middle of COVID, so my husband was not able to join me, which we were really sad about. So this time, my husband was able to join me, and so was my daughter at the time, who was 2.5. So we were just really excited to see our new baby. But we did notice that the sonographer was pretty quiet, and she was a little chatty in the beginning with us, but then she got really quiet and seemed to be going over his heart several times, and we weren't really sure what that was about.
Did you come to have an understanding of the results of this appointment?
My understanding was that Brooks had several anomalies. The most concerning were the several heart defects that were seen.
Did you receive an official diagnosis at this appointment?
Not at this time.
What next steps, if any, did you take after this appointment?
We were referred to maternal fetal medicine.
And when did that appointment occur?
It occurred the next day.
Who was the maternal fetal medicine doctor you saw?
Dr. Cooper.
Could you briefly describe what happened at this next appointment with Dr. Cooper?
I had another ultrasound that took about an hour, in which we were trying to pay attention to maybe see what anomalies they also had found. And then Dr. Cooper came into the room with like a diagram. And was also very emotional with us as well. And just told us that she, to my understanding, this heart condition, which she did tell us was critical aortic stenosis, which then leads to hypoplastic left heart syndrome, which was already showing, was very critical, the most critical, to my understanding, that she's ever seen. So at that point, I think the only thing we wanted to know was if there was anything we could do for our son. And she couldn't give us an answer. And so at that point, we were referred to a pediatric cardiologist.
Did you go on to meet with that pediatric cardiologist?
We did.
Who was that doctor?
Dr. Womack.
And when did that appointment with him occur?
2 days later.
What happened at that appointment with Dr. Womack?
We got a fetal echocardiogram.
Did you have an understanding of the results?
I did.
And what were those?
It was essentially what Dr. Cooper had also shared with us, that Brooks's heart had several defects. And while it could be classified as hypoplastic left heart syndrome, to my understanding, it was affecting the other ventricles. So there were many things that he went over that were just not correct with the anatomy of the heart, to my understanding.
Did you come to have an understanding about what options were available to you?
We talked about how if a surgical option were able to be performed, it would have to be at an outside facility. And the likelihood of finding someone to do that was a coin toss, essentially. To my understanding, if executed perfectly, the outcome may not change. We were also briefed on palliative care if we chose that option.
The pregnancy initially progressed smoothly, and the family was excited to grow. However, at 18 weeks, an anatomy scan revealed severe heart anomalies. Specialists confirmed that Brooks had a critical heart condition that would likely require multiple surgeries and potentially a transplant. Even with these interventions, the long-term prognosis was uncertain.
Did you consider going forward with those surgical interventions?
I can only speak for myself in that moment, and I wanted to see if there was anything that could help my son. So if someone was willing to do it, I don't think it was off the table for us.
Did you eventually move forward with any of those surgical interventions?
No, because no one would perform those surgical interventions.
Was it your understanding if you had been able to find a doctor who would have performed the surgical intervention, if that would have resolved Brooks's heart issues?
Objection calls for speculation.
Would you restate the question, please?
Yes. Was it your understanding if there had been a doctor available to perform the surgical interventions that you had discussed with Dr. Womack, if that could have resolved Brooks's heart issues?
Are you reiterating the objection, I gather?
Yes, Your Honor.
I'm fuzzy on what the question is.
I will rephrase again. Did you have an understanding of whether any of these surgical interventions that had been discussed could resolve Brooks's heart issues?
I'm going to permit you to answer that question.
To my understanding, it was like a Band-Aid. It was thoroughly discussed, each step of the procedure that could potentially be done. But again, it was being done not as it normally would be. It would be done on the opposite ventricle, to my understanding. So at best, it would ultimately result in a heart transplant before he was the age of 4 or 5. And we were then, to my understanding, informed that a heart transplant is not an end-all be-all as well. Those tend to only be a temporary solution for around 10 years.
You testified a moment ago that in addition to considering these possible surgical interventions, you also discussed palliative care. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you consider moving forward with palliative care?
We did not.
Why not?
Based on my understanding of some of Brooks's heart defects, his pulmonary veins also were not flowing properly. So that directly impacts lung development, which we would not be able to know. And so if I were to continue the pregnancy, not only would I be risking my life of developing preeclampsia, but I was not willing to watch my son suffer and essentially gasp for air.
Did you have an understanding about Brooks's likelihood of survival through the rest of the pregnancy term?
To my understanding, because I did ask this, and I don't think that any parent wants to hope that their baby's heartbeat stops, but I thought maybe if it would, I could get care here. But to my understanding, because the fetal heart is able to adapt and he is attached to me, that likely he would still continue to have a heartbeat until birth, because that's when the transition happens, to my understanding.
After this appointment with Dr. Womack, did you meet with your MFM, Dr. Cooper, again?
I did.
What happened at that second appointment?
Objection, relevance. Your Honor, I think we're going beyond the instruction here.
Overruled. You can answer.
I received an amniocentesis to move forward with some genetic testing that we decided upon. And it was at that appointment that I think I fully made the decision to terminate my pregnancy.
Did you learn any new information at this appointment that helped that decision?
I did.
What was that?
Dr. Womack, to my understanding, did his due diligence and sought colleagues to see if there were any pediatric cardiologists that were willing to take this case, and there were not any.
The family explored every possible option, but were devastated to learn that no surgeon was willing to perform the complex procedures required. Brooks's condition was further complicated by additional concerns, such as underdeveloped lungs. Continuing the pregnancy also posed significant risks to Kayla's health due to her history of dangerous condition. After weighing the options, Kayla and James made the difficult decision to terminate the pregnancy.
So once you had decided to terminate this pregnancy, what kind of abortion care were you seeking?
At this point, I was around 20 weeks pregnant, so my options were quite limited to my understanding. I had a previous emergency C-section, and also with my risk of preeclampsia, my understanding was it would be best to do it in a hospital setting, and we also wanted to meet our son. That was really important to us. So I had an induction.
Were you able to obtain that care in Idaho?
No.
You have an understanding as to why?
Because it is 2 days prior to us receiving the diagnosis, was when the trigger law went into effect here.
Which hospital did you end up choosing for your care?
We went to the University of Washington.
Why did you pick the University of Washington?
Just because we were really our only options, to my understanding, were a hospital setting due to my likelihood of potentially developing preeclampsia and my prior C-section, as well as an induction, which is what we wanted.
How did you get to the University of Washington Hospital?
My husband worked a 12-hour shift, and then we drove 8.5 hours with our 2.5-year-old.
Where did you stay in Washington?
At a hotel.
Did you have an understanding of how much this induction procedure would cost you?
We got a good faith estimate, several, and it was between roughly $16,000 to like $20,000.
How did you plan to pay for the procedure?
We were very privileged to be able to take out a personal loan.
What date did you actually undergo the induction procedure?
I believe I was called to come in the afternoon on September 5th of 2022.
What happened after Brooks was born?
They handed him to me.
Do you know if Brooks was born with a heartbeat?
We were not expecting that, but he was briefly.
You have an understanding as to why he was born with a heartbeat?
At the time when they just checked, I still hadn't delivered the placenta, so he was still attached.
Do you know approximately how long he had a heartbeat after he was born?
Likely moments.
Did you learn anything following the procedure that helped to further inform your decision?
We did decide to move forward with an autopsy, which just confirmed that Brooks's heart defect, to our understanding, had even progressed more than what we had even seen just a few weeks prior.
Did you incur other costs in addition to the cost of the procedure itself?
I was not aware that there are situations regarding human remains. So that was something that we had to navigate while processing the loss of our son in a place that we didn't know. We decided to get him cremated, and then I also had to return 2 weeks later to pick up his remains by driving, because there's hoops that you have to jump through, to my understanding, if we flew.
Idaho's restrictive abortion laws, which had recently taken effect, forced the Smiths to seek care out of state. They traveled over 8 hours to Washington, where Kayla underwent an induction at a hospital. Brooks was born briefly with a heartbeat, but passed away shortly after. The family chose to have an autopsy, which confirmed the severity of his condition. Although heartbroken, they felt validated in their decision, knowing they had spared their son further suffering. The ordeal also placed financial and emotional strains on the family, as they had to navigate the costs of the procedure, travel, and cremation.
When did you find out you were pregnant for a third time?
I believe it was the end of March, beginning of April of 2023.
Was this a planned pregnancy?
It was.
Where did you live when you learned you were pregnant for a third time?
Here in Idaho.
How did you feel getting pregnant again in Idaho?
I was petrified.
Could you explain why?
We knew that we wanted to get pregnant again, but after our experience here and my risk of developing preeclampsia, I was really scared.
Did you remain in Idaho during this entire pregnancy?
Not during the entire pregnancy.
Where did you go?
We moved to Washington.
Did you end up experiencing any health complications during this third pregnancy?
I did.
What were those?
I developed preeclampsia again.
How many weeks along were you?
I was around 21 weeks when I was put on blood pressure medication.
How did your symptoms compare to the preeclampsia in your first pregnancy?
It was similar. My blood pressure was not really able to be managed well on blood pressure medication, so I did get admitted again. And this time, my daughter that I was pregnant with at the time she was not doing well. She went from the 65th percentile, to my understanding, to the 11th percentile. So there could have been issues with my placenta. So it was just decided to move forward with a pretty urgent C-section.
And how many weeks were you at the time of the emergency C-section?
I was 24 weeks and 5 days, I believe. Or 34 weeks, sorry.
And what happened after the C-section?
Nora had to be resuscitated. She had to be on CPAP and was able to be weaned off that, I believe, around 36 hours. Overall, she was relatively well, and then she did actually develop an infection around her umbilical stump, so she had to be life-flighted to a hospital in Seattle, but she's a healthy 1-year-old now.
How was your health immediately after giving birth?
To my understanding, it's not uncommon to still have high blood pressure as a result of preeclampsia after birth for some time. So I did have to stay on blood pressure medication and stay in the hospital a couple extra days.
And how are you doing now?
In 2023, Kayla became pregnant again. Although she and James were eager to expand their family, they were understandably anxious. Early in the pregnancy, complications arose when Kayla was diagnosed with her previous condition related to blood pressure again. To ensure both her safety and their daughter's health, the family decided to move to Washington, where they could access better medical care. At 34 weeks, Kayla underwent an emergency C-section. Her daughter, Nora, required immediate medical attention, but recovered well and is now a healthy. Kayla also took time to recover from the effects of her condition and is now in good health.
Would you have preferred to have your abortion procedure in Idaho if it had been legal?
Yes.
Explain briefly why.
These are my physicians that were with me from the beginning. I had rapport with Dr. Cooper. I had seen her in my previous pregnancy, so she knew my history. I had already had a plan in place with all of my physicians here. So going somewhere I didn't know and had to explain my situation to them, and having someone come in and tell me congratulations because they didn't know the situation, I think all could have been prevented.
Thank you for sharing all that with us. I'd like to briefly pivot to your third pregnancy.
Kayla and her family have decided to remain in Washington, where they feel safer and better supported.
And where I live now, so.
Is your plan to stay in Washington for now?
At this time, if the abortion bans are still here in Idaho, then yeah.
So if Idaho's abortion laws were to be changed, would you consider moving back to Idaho?
Yeah, I would.
Reflecting on her experiences, Kayla expressed a desire for change in Idaho's restrictive laws so families facing similar situations can access the care they need without additional hardships. Big thanks to our viewers for joining the courtroom journey with us. Your interest in the stories of justice is what keeps our channel alive.